go together. The first is texture. Texture refers to how the elements in a song are arranged, and specifically into what are known as the 5 textural layers: melody, chord, bass, beat, and novelty. I think these are fairly intuitive, so I'm just going to read through them. And what happens is, as you're analyzing a song, you can talk about which layers are present, which ones are stronger or sort of brought out more. You can talk about a particular layer that changes maybe over the course of the song, etc. So first you have the melody, which is foregrounded. Usually it's the vocals, although it could be an electric guitar or synth, especially during an instrument solo. Here you want to apply things like analyzing the range or the contour, so treat it like a melody. Next we have the chord layer. This acts as the glue for the track, so sort of holding everything together by articulating the harmonic progression. It tends to be more middle register, whereas the melody is high, and then it plays the chord loops. This would be things like the keyboard, the guitars, synth layers, etc. Next we have the bass, which is the anchor of the texture. Usually it's playing the lowest pitch in the texture, and it's either playing the chord root to sort of articulate the chord loop framework, or repeating a riff. Like if you think of a lot of Michael Jackson songs, you get like that's a repeating riff in the bass. Next we have the beat layer, whose job it is to drive the rhythm, the energy, and ultimately the dynamics of the track. Changes in the beat layer usually determine does the section sound louder, like a chorus, or maybe more stripped back, like a verse. This can consist of drum set, drum machine, like the 808 drum machine in hip-hop and rap, or beatbox in something like a Pentatonix. And then finally we have the novelty layer, which is reserved for unique instruments or sounds that don't really fit neatly into the other categories and help define a track's individuality. So for some examples, we could have like the flute or the sitar, like in the Beatles, violin, like Yellowcard, saxophone, like a narrative or spoken sample, harmonica, choir. The sky's the limit for the novelty layer. But either way, the novelty layer will stand out as something unique to that particular track. Next, we're going to talk about this word here, which is timbre. So remember, it's pronounced timbre. I've had a lot of students come through and say timbre or timbre or something else. That's kind of how I know that you just read the slide and didn't listen to the video. So timbre is the quality of a sound that distinguishes it from other sounds. It's what makes a violin, for example, sound different than a trumpet or different than the voice. Now, in the past, students have really liked talking about timbre in their analyses because they kind of feel like this is just a free lunch. I could say whatever I want here and say it's technically timbre. Like, oh, it sounds so smooth or so upbeat or so jazzy or cool. But really, timbre isn't just like a free lunch of descriptions, but there are specific oppositional pairs that music theorists use when describing timbre. This isn't meant to be exhaustive, but things like bright versus dark, pure versus noisy, full versus hollow, sharp versus smooth, or static versus evolving. So when you use timbre in your analysis, which I expect most of you probably will do, try to maybe pair them and contrast different sounds in the texture, like a sharp drums versus a smooth string section or a smooth vocal, something like that. Speaking of which, some terms we can use to describe timbre include attack, which a high attack describes a sharp or aggressive sound like a drum or a guitar strum. Sustain, which high sustain means a sound that's smoother with a constant dynamic, like strings or a synth pad or a choir. And then release, so a high or a long release sounds like reverb applied to a track. So if the track is going ah, and then you hear sort of this ah, like an echo after that particular pitch, then that means it has a long release. Versus a short release, which would just cut off like ah, and then stop. Other good timbre words to apply to a track include auto-tune. If you hear that sort of as a timbral choice, I'm sure you know what the sound of auto-tune might sound like in a range of electronically produced tracks these days. Distortion, usually applied to guitar, sometimes drums, sometimes voice, where it kind of gets that hard metallic edge, like jan jan jan. I can't really do it with my voice, but I think you know what I'm referencing. Delay, which sounds sort of like a echo after a vocal line, after maybe a guitar riff, where you sort of hear this digga 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 digga, like almost like a bouncing sound, where the same sound that you heard before is going to repeat at a rhythm after it. Or filtering or filter sweep. So what a filter refers to is taking out some of the frequencies of the spectrum, so it sounds kind of like high and tinny, like an old-fashioned radio, or low and washed out if you're taking out the higher frequencies. And then a filter sweep, which I'm sure all of you have heard at some point in EDM or hip-hop or the like, is where you take that window and you usually slowly widen it over time, so it creates sort of a growing effect. I can't really imitate with my voice, but it'd be like shh, and then like create a large point of arrival for the drop, for example, or chorus.